Hey everybody, Ned Canty here, General Director of Opera Memphis and Stage Director of our production of Elixir of Love, which is opening on February 2nd, so getting real close. Today is, I believe, day 9 of our rehearsal process, and our process here is similar to a lot of regional opera companies. We do everything in about 3 weeks, which is not a lot of time. We spend 2 weeks rehearsing and then a week teching, and then we open. That's essentially how it breaks down. So this week is about finishing up the show and then going back, looking at things, polishing things, or changing things if need be, fixing things that don't make sense anymore. Sometimes you stage something in the first act, you finish the show, and when you go back, you think, that doesn't really makes sense with where we've ended up. You've discovered things since you staged it, and I have a feeling that we're going to have a certain amount of that happening during this production because there, are so many subtle and interesting things that these particular singers have brought to these roles that have changed the way that I think about the characters. That I have a feeling there are going to be a few things we want to change. The other thing we talked a lot about today. And is a particular fascination / obsession of mine, I guess, if you think I know what I'm talking about or not, and it's tone. To me, I think that's really the most important and interesting part of what a director does, is try to set tone or match tone. And of course, I don't mean tone in the musical sense. I mean it in, is it comic? Is it dramatic? If it's comic, is it slapstick? Is it sentimental? Is it cynical black comedy? Is it the comedy of embarrassment that you see in The Office or many of our TV shows today? Is it absurdist? Is it any of these things? Once you start looking at an overall piece that way, you break it down into smaller and smaller pieces and smaller beats, and you try to figure out what is the tone of this moment? How far can we go in a particular direction and still recover? You can play with tone, you can shift tone, sometimes you can radically shift tone, and it can be very successful. You can have different things contrasting each other. End of The Godfather, when there's the scenes in the church and the scenes of the Corleone family getting business done. Didn't want to give any spoilers there in case you haven't seen it. Great movie. So you can have two contrasting things that create a very specific kind of tone that's about contrast. Elixir of Love is very interesting in terms of tone because of how much sentimental comedy there is, or how much sentiment really there is, mainly through Nemorino. And of course, most famously through Una furtiva lagrima, which was a piece that the librettist tried to convince Donizetti he didn't need. Donizetti had to fight for it, and thank goodness he did, because that and a few other moments, notably Adina Credimi in the Act 1 finale, they allow us to take what has been a sort of wacky, goofy, devil-may-care piece up until then, and slow everything down, and make everything very real for a while. And then we get pulled out of it, and we end the act in a different way than we were going with Adina Credimi. But the question is, the questions you have to ask yourself as a director are, well, what precipitates these changes in tone? Is it a character suddenly feeling something like Nemorino, discovering that Adina is going to get married tonight, and in his panic and his drunkenness, he doesn't know what to do but to sort of sing to her, even though he's surrounded by his townspeople and Belcore, and is kind of embarrassing both himself and Adina and everybody else in the town. It's this kind of slow motion train wreck, but still so heartfelt and just raw and honest. This Nemorino is a guy who doesn't know how to hide his feelings or shape them. He's very simple in that way, in a positive way. So is it that? Is it something that shifts in the orchestra and we sort of catch up to it? You always have to ask yourself how you want to present that, and you also ask yourself, how far do you want to go? Today we talked a lot about that in terms of the character of Belcore, and Belcore is sort of fascinating. He definitely has many of the hallmarks of just a classic braggart soldier. In the Commedia, it was Il Capitano. In Roman theater was Miles Gloriosus, if I'm remembering college correctly. Forgive me if I'm not. Dramaturgs. But this is a character who's been around for a long time. He can, the surface of him, the braggart part, can be very that surface. We have worked very hard to make sure that we show the guy who exists under the image of Belcore. So we sort of show some of those differences between him when he's, being Sergeant Belcore for everyone, and when he's being surprised or taken off guard by something. He sometimes has very different reactions. The part of it that we talked about today tonally was how mean is he, basically. The end of Act One can be pretty brutal, and watching the entire town slowly turn on Nemorino and go from in the beginning of Act One, sort of dealing with him the way you would deal with a cousin or a brother or someone who's irritating, but he's still family. Watching them slowly, with the goading of Belcore, turn on Nemorino and not have his back anymore. In fact, to be laughing at him and talking about him going crazy, and how does he think he can possibly compete with this, handsome sergeant? So it's one of those things where, as comedy has changed and our ideas of comedy has changed and the tone of comedy has changed, the things that we can laugh at have changed. That's sort of undeniable. Laughing at a woman because she's old and never got married, not so funny anymore, but was very much the subject of comedy early on. There are all kinds of things, and whether you say that it's politically correct or not, whatever, that's really unimportant. What matters is that you always want to make sure that if something was designed to be funny, that you're presenting it in a way that allows the audience to laugh. At least that's important to me. So looking at the end of this act, when everybody is turning on him, you need to make sure that you don't all of a sudden just go, these people are horrible. Nemorino should leave right now and never come back because they're all despicable. And if all you did was look at what they were saying, you very well might have that reaction to what they're saying about him. But of course, it's our job to manage that, to make sure that we understand their point of view, which is that Nemorino's gone from being an annoyance to an embarrassment to himself, and an embarrassment to the town, to Adina. And as somebody brings them along there, they recognize that and they start pushing him away, because at a certain point, isn't it his own fault that he's getting into this situation? At a certain point, isn't it up to him to realize that she's just not that into him and move on? And I think that point of view is strong. I think there's also something with their laughter that's about wanting the situation to be funny, about releasing some of the tension. And of course, with tone, it's all about tension. In that finale, you're kind of ratcheting up the tension through Adina Credimi, through Belcore's response to it, where he threatens to beat up Nemorino, through Adina's response to it, where she, with incredible coldness, takes Nemorino apart piece by piece, saying that he's half crazy, that he thinks that just because he loves her, that she should love him. It's pretty brutal, and the tension is ratcheted up pretty far at the end of that, and we really had to decide tonally, how far do we want to take this? He's talking about beating Nemorino up. Do we want that threat to be real? Do we want it to be something he's saying just for swagger? And if it's just that, do we want it to be funny in a kind of, hold me back, hold me back? No, I mean it, hold me back. Kind of way? Or do we want it to be a bully who realizes that this guy isn't going to fight back, and so he goes further and further in teasing him and pushing him until this poor guy is basically in tears, which isn't that funny. We've done a couple of things. We're experimenting a lot, I'll admit, and I think that with something like tone in a comedy, you don't really know until a few people who haven't been in the room come in and watch it at a run-through or a dress rehearsal, and that's where you really learn if you've got the tone right and can, do some final tweaks. But we've talked about it a lot. We've put in a few things at the very end that we think will help puncture some of the tension through a little bit of absurdity, taking the meanness to a comical extreme that brings us just past the believable, where we're not feeling sorry for him. We make it kind of so absurd, his dilemma, that he's, he's getting his head stuck in a bucket or something, that kind of thing. We're not doing that. But where it's just so pathetic that you can't help but laugh to a certain extent. And of course, again, as I've said before, I think possibly on these videos, but certainly a lot during rehearsals, the further down we bring Nemorino in Act 1, the further up he has to go in Act 2 as things start looking his way. So, wow, this is the longest of these videos I've done thus far, but as you can probably tell, tone is one of those things that is very important to me, and when you see masters of tone who are able to jump back and forth between the serious and the comic, or make these sort of seamless blends from one state into the other, I really think that's just seeing craft at its ultimate. And of course, it's late, and I'm tired, so I'm not thinking of any really great examples of that, except maybe Kung Fu Hustle, which, if you haven't seen, is another great movie, although maybe a little more niche than The Godfather. Anyway, I'm done talking. I'm going to go home, and I hope you're enjoying these videos. As always, if there's anything that you want me to talk more about or go off on, the way I've gone off on tone, email me, leave a comment, Facebook us, follow us on Twitter, whatever, and let me know. And if you think that these are worthwhile, tell your friends. And again, if you haven't gotten your tickets yet to Elixir, go get them. www.operamemphis.org. Thanks very much. Have a great night.